I'd like to first of all begin, though, with a quote that I'd like for you to look at for just a second. Take a look at this. Henry Adams has said, "What one knows is in youth of little moment. They know enough who know how to learn." They know enough who know how to learn. This lecture series is all about learning. That's the primary focus for us. That's really what we want to think about. But we are immediately met with an interesting problem. One of the early problems for us is to try to define learning. Let me give you an example of just how difficult that is. I am married and have 3 children. My middle child is a young boy named Mikey. Mikey wanted to learn to tie his shoes early on. He was ambitious and wanted to do well. So I taught him how to tie his shoes. So I thought. I showed him. And he tried it. And he failed. And I showed him again. And he failed. And I showed him again. And he failed. I must have shown Mikey 1,000 times how to tie his shoes. For some reason or another, he couldn't get it. He just couldn't understand it. And I would show him the same way every time. You know how you're supposed to do it the same way every time. Still couldn't get it. And then I remember that summer afternoon when Mikey said, "All right, Dad, show me one more time." And I remember I showed it to him, and all of a sudden, he did it. Oh. Now, most of you can't remember this moment. It happened for most of us. Any of us that are here who can tie shoes, this happened for us. We had to learn how to tie our shoes. He did the first thing that all of us did as well. He untied it and did it again, right? He had to make sure he hadn't forgotten. For several weeks, we found ourselves actually kind of wondering where Mikey was when we were in public. We would be in a mall. Where's Mikey? Turn around and find Mikey way back there, down the hall, bent over, tying his shoes. He had to practice to make sure that he got it there. We say that he learned to tie his shoes, but the real question is, what happened here that for one moment allowed Mikey to be able to learn how to tie his shoes? What happened here? Now, folks, there are a lot of people who make a lot of money that can't answer that question because we're not always certain exactly what happens here when we learn. It's somewhat mysterious, if you will, which makes it difficult for us because we're talking about a process or a project in learning that is somewhat mysterious. But we do know what learning is not. Any student knows that just because I get an A in math class doesn't mean I learned math. I remember several years ago I had a student in a chemistry class in high school. I myself teach English. She was in my class talking about chemistry, and I remember that she was getting some answers from her friends. I remember one of her friends told her, "You know, you better probably figure out why the answers are that way." And I remember she said, "I don't care, just give me the junk." And she graduated, one of the top in the class, went on to university. Her first semester in college, does this sound like the story I opened with? Her first semester in college, she ends up failing chemistry. I was speaking with one of her colleagues, and I asked her colleague, I said, "I thought this student got an A in chemistry in high school." Mr. McGee, the student responds, "Mr. McGee, getting an A in chemistry doesn't mean you learned chemistry." Now, we know that's true. We know that grades are not, in fact, what we call learning. And as a matter of fact, I mean, if you're only watching this course so that you can find out how to get better grades and nothing else, guys, we all know the key to getting better grades. It's simple to cheat and not get caught. It's what I call academic suicide, and it's insane. You can do it. And there are loads of students that do it. And then, like John, in my opening story, find themselves at midterms, their first semester of college, and guess what? You can't cheat on an essay, in-class essay. Uh-oh. Now what? Now what? I want to define learning as the ability to answer the question, how does this make any meaning for me? See, the problem that we have is, how do we know when we've learned something? Right? How do we know when we've learned? See, parents, and we'll talk more about this, parents, later on in lectures 11 and 12, parents assume if a young person receives a grade of A in 9th grade mathematics, they have learned mathematics, you see. Parents assume that, and it's not always true. Our question for us is to ask, how do I know when I've learned something? And I want to suggest, I know when I've learned something anytime I can say the following. When new information is provided to me, anytime I can say, oh, I get it, that's like something else I already know. Now, what I'm saying here will be fundamental to understanding specifically the other ideas in especially the first 7 lectures. Anytime I can connect, match, new information to something I already know, I will call that learning, and here's why. Because I can use, and you'll want to underline that word, I want to be able to use the information. If I am in fact not using that information, then I'm not learning that information. So the challenge always for me is to be able to get information that I will use. Now I'm going to come back to that idea later because it's so significant. We will ask ourselves, how can I get information that I can then use? There's several word pictures that I can use to maybe help you understand a little of what I'm talking about here. One of them is, you know the old chemistry models that we used to have where you have a ball of clay and then the toothpick sticking out of it and then more balls of, that kind of thing? Imagine for a second that the stuff that you are in possession of as knowledge for you is the ball of clay, the ball of old stuff, as I will call it, okay? And then the toothpicks that are coming out from the ball of old clay, any kind of new information. For me to be able to learn, I have to be able to connect the new stuff into the old stuff. Does that make sense? That's what I have to be able to do, okay? But we have a problem, and it's best illustrated by a student of mine named Allie Smith who came up with this metaphor. She said, one of my problems is this, but let me help explain it with the word picture. And I said, okay. She said, imagine a basketball hoop. And I said, okay. And she said, a basketball hoop is my hoop of old stuff. It's the things that I know really well, that I understand. I said, okay. And the basketball is what I shoot through the hoop. Every time I can shoot a basketball through the hoop, I've learned something. And I went, well, that's great. And she said, but wait, I have a better one than that. Let me explain to you what my problem is, Mr. McGee, in math. And I said, okay. She said, I think I figured out what's wrong in math. My basketball hoop is a Nerf hoop. You know Nerf hoops? The little tiny... My basketball hoop is a Nerf hoop. The new stuff I'm trying to learn, the ball that's being shot through the Nerf hoop, is a beach ball. And I went, bingo. That one works for me. See, that one works for me. I want to talk to you quickly about what it means to be a good student. I find a lot of students who I teach at the high school level have never really considered what it means to be a good student. Because oftentimes we believe that if a student is receiving good grades, they are a good student. But I'm not convinced that that's true. First of all, I want to suggest that before you can do anything, you must be something if you're going to be a good student. Now, this is significant. I will have parents, for example, who will come to me and say, okay, Mr. McGee, we need to get our son, our daughter into school, a good school. Now, exactly what is it that we need to do? And they pull out a paper and pen and get ready to write. And I say, wait. Before your son or daughter does anything, they have to be something. Really what? Two things. First of all, a good student has to be honest. Now, what do I mean by that? Any time that we know that we have an academic weakness, we have to be willing to admit that. See, I have students who come in my room, I teach English, and will say, Mr. McGee, I hate to read, but I love math. And I go, that's so great. You know that you hate to read? That's so great. Here's a book, let's read. Wait, Mr. you didn't hear me. I don't read. Oh, that's great. Honesty in a student means that a student is willing to admit academic, what I'm going to call deficiencies or weaknesses. Right? Now, some students will say they don't care. Have you heard this one before? Hey, man, you better start doing your math. You know, you're not going to do very well in the SAT. I don't care. Hey, you know, you probably should start learning how to read because I don't care. I've taught students enough to understand one thing, if I understand anything, and that is students really do care about learning. They do. When a student tells me I don't care, that's code language for help. That's what that means to me. When a student says I don't care, that's code language. It means I need help. Honesty means a student understands they have academic weaknesses. But I have a lot of students who like to kind of parade around their academic weaknesses. They will in fact sometimes say, you know, I'm a really lousy student in mathematics, as if somehow that's something to be proud of. Good students, number two, are courageous. What do I mean by that? Once they know an academic weakness, they're capable of having the courage to do something about it. And that means work. See? That's courage. The challenge is to know how to fix academic weaknesses. Guys, that's why we're here. That's the reason that you will watch this lecture series. We want to know how to fix academic weaknesses. If you will, maybe we're looking for a good method. Something that will help us be able to fix our academic weaknesses. Once we admit we've got problems, we're halfway there. Because then we can finally begin to try and fix our problems. But how do I get there? That's what this series is all about. I like to think about it, though, with word pictures that for most students make sense because they are either athletes themselves or they know about athletics. See, we are familiar with how important it is for athletes to train. If a student wants to win, they know they have to train. Now, there's something very interesting to me about this. I can talk to a junior in high school right before their summer, right before their senior year. And I will ask them, you're an athlete, right? Yes, I am an athlete. You are going to participate in sports in the fall, is that correct? Yes, I am. It's going to be exciting. We'll try and win a state championship. Oh, so you're going to try and do some things over the summer, maybe to prepare. Oh, absolutely. Really, what kinds of things are you going to try and do? Well, you know, the normal things. I'm going to work out, I'm going to run, I'm going to lift weights. I'm going to do everything that I can to make sure that I'm the best athlete. Okay, that's what you say you're going to do. Of course. Every athlete knows if they don't train, they don't win. At the end of the summer, I will oftentimes see the student again and will ask them, so at the beginning of the summer, you said you were going to train. Did you train? Did you get up every morning and go to the weight room? Well, I started, but there were, other... Okay, well, did you run? You said that wasn't... Well, I just didn't have enough time. See, we know something. Athletes understand they have to train if they're going to win. Years ago, I remember playing for a coach who was a strong disciplinarian. And he had a sign in the locker room, didn't allow anything else on the walls. This was the sign that we had to look at when he was yelling at us at halftime, and we didn't want to look at him, and so we would look over his shoulder, and there would be this sign right there for us to read. When we went out onto the floor, we had to reach up and touch the sign. It was an old one. And every time I think about what makes good students, I think about this sign. And throughout this lecture series, I would like for you to go back to what I'm about to say. On the wall it said, somewhere, he is out there training while I am not. And when we meet, he will win. Somewhere, he's out there training while I am not. And when we meet, he will win. See, I've argued for a long time that we in America ought to have the very best students in the world because we have the best athletes in the world. We understand something so well. If you don't train, you don't win. Now, I don't understand why it is in the school where I teach that a guy can go down a floor, can go between his legs, drive to the hoops, slam dunk, and he's the hero of the school. Hero of the school. But the same student can go into the library to do a research project, and all of a sudden, he's the school nerd. It's kind of strange, isn't it? If you think about it, it's kind of strange. All of the stuff a good athlete does is the same kinds of things that we're going to do when we study. All of the stuff a good music student does is the same thing we're going to do to be a good student. Good music students understand they have to practice if they're going to do well. They understand this.